The sound of military drums still echoed in my head when the lawyer read my name. "To Miss Evelyn Carter," he said, clearing his throat, "your grandfather leaves this envelope." That was it. No estate, no stocks, no mention of the man who had once told me I was the only one in the family who understood service. My father chuckled under his breath, unable to hide his satisfaction. "Guess he didn't love you much, sweetheart." The words hit harder than the 21-gun salute outside. I wanted to disappear right there in that wood-paneled room, except I couldn't, because if Grandpa had taught me anything, it was to keep my chin up even when the world mistook silence for weakness. Everyone stared as I held the small envelope. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that hadn't absorbed a single tear. My older brother Thomas leaned back in his chair, already calculating what his share of the estate would buy him, probably another racehorse or a second vacation home. Grandpa's lawyer, Mr. Halloway, cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, congratulations on inheriting the main property and associated financial accounts." My parents' eyes gleamed like polished silver. I swallowed the rising lump in my throat and turned the envelope over. The seal bore my grandfather's initials, HAC, Henry Allen Carter, 4-star general, decorated war hero, and the only person who had ever believed I could make something of myself without a man's name beside mine. After the meeting, I stepped out onto the porch of the Virginia estate. The October air was crisp, heavy with the scent of cedar and gunpowder from the morning ceremony. Down the hill, Marines in dress blues folded his flag and handed it to my grandmother. She didn't look up. Inside, laughter erupted, wine glasses, clinking old grudges dissolving into new greed. Dad's voice carried above the rest. "A ticket to London. Maybe she can finally find herself a husband with a title." Their laughter followed me like shrapnel. I sat on the stone steps, fingers trembling as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery and something that fluttered softly against the wind. The paper read, "Evelyn, you've served quietly as I once did. Now it's time you know the rest. Report to London, one-way ticket enclosed. Duty doesn't end when the uniform comes off. Grandpa." I unfolded the ticket. Washington Dulles to Heathrow one-way. Departure next morning. My breath hitched. Grandpa had always loved his cryptic missions, but this one felt different. There was no address, no instructions, just that single sentence about duty. Behind me, the door opened. "You're really going to go?" Dad asked, swirling his bourbon like he was auditioning for arrogance itself. "Yes," I said simply. He snorted. "You always were a dreamer. London's expensive, sweetheart. Don't call when the money runs out." I stood, brushed the dust from my black dress, and looked him straight in the eye. "Don't worry, Dad. I won't." That night I packed my Navy file, my uniform, and the letter. The folded flag stayed at the foot of my bed. When I zipped the bag, I caught my reflection in the mirror, tired eyes, a straight posture, and a spark of something I hadn't felt in years: defiance. At dawn, the cab rolled through Arlington, past rows of white headstones that shimmered like frost under the rising sun. I remembered Grandpa's words during my commissioning ceremony. "When you wear that uniform, you represent every soldier who no longer can. Never forget that." At the airport, I clutched the ticket as the gate attendant scanned it. She looked up, surprised. "Ma'am, this is first class, courtesy of the Royal Embassy." "The what?" She smiled politely. "You've been upgraded." My pulse quickened. I boarded, half expecting someone to stop me, but no one did. Somewhere between the Atlantic clouds and sunrise, I read the letter again and again, trying to decipher its meaning. When the plane touched down at Heathrow, gray skies opened into drizzle. The customs officer stamped my passport and waved me through. I rolled my small suitcase toward the exit and then froze. A man in a tailored black coat stood by the barrier holding a white placard with my name written in firm, elegant script, LT, Evelyn Carter. Our eyes met. He lowered the sign and offered a crisp British salute. "Ma'am," he said in a refined accent, "if you'll follow me, the Queen wishes to see you." For a moment I thought it was a joke. Then he held out his credentials, Royal Household embossed in gold. The crowd around us blurred into silence. I stepped toward him, heart pounding. The Queen. "Yes, ma'am, you were expected." Expected. As I followed him through the damp London air toward a black car with tinted windows, my mind raced. My family was probably still laughing back home, assuming I'd gone chasing ghosts. They had no idea what kind of ghost I was about to find. Somewhere between grief and disbelief, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't the poor granddaughter with an empty envelope anymore. I was on assignment, one last mission from a general who never stopped giving orders, even from beyond the grave. And for the first time in years, I felt like a soldier again. The rain hadn't let up since I landed in London. It wasn't the kind of storm that shouted. It was quiet and deliberate, like the city itself was listening. The driver guided me through Heathrow's crowds with an efficiency that suggested this wasn't his first secret assignment. He spoke only when necessary, his crisp accent cutting through the hum of rolling luggage. "Ma'am, the vehicle is waiting outside." The black Bentley gleamed beneath the gray sky. Its license plate carried no numbers, only a crown. When I stepped inside, the smell of leather and old money filled the air. The driver closed the door behind me and began to speak over his shoulder. "You are to be taken directly to the royal estate. Her Majesty has requested your presence personally." I stared out the window, trying to piece together why a queen would care about the death of a retired American general or his granddaughter. "Was my grandfather known here?" I asked carefully. The driver didn't answer immediately. "In certain circles, ma'am, he was regarded as a man of unusual discretion." That sounded like something out of a classified briefing, not a eulogy. As we drove, London unfolded outside my window, the Thames glittering under bridges, soldiers in red tunics guarding palaces I'd only seen in history books. The city carried the kind of weight that demanded silence. I thought about Grandpa's words, "Duty doesn't end when the uniform comes off." Maybe this was his version of a final salute. The car turned through iron gates marked with the royal crest. Guards checked credentials, saluted, and waved us through. My breath caught as Buckingham Palace came into view, its marble facade rising through the mist, like something from another time. Inside, everything was velvet and discipline. Portraits of monarchs lined the hallways. Every surface gleamed with order and purpose. I followed the driver through corridors until we stopped before a tall man in uniform, an older gentleman whose bearing reminded me of Grandpa himself. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Sir Edmund Fairchild, Private Secretary to Her Majesty." His handshake was firm, his eyes keen. "You must be wondering why you're here." "That's putting it lightly," I replied. He smiled faintly. "Your grandfather was a man of both duty and secrecy. During the Cold War, he commanded a joint US-UK operation that prevented a rather disastrous outcome. Few people know it existed, and fewer still know what it cost him." I felt my pulse quicken. "You mean he worked for British intelligence?" "In a manner of speaking," Sir Edmund said. "He was trusted here deeply. In gratitude, Her Majesty offered him a personal commendation which he declined. He requested that recognition be deferred." "Deferred to when—" He gestured toward a nearby table. On it lay a small leather case embossed with both the Union Jack and the American Eagle. "To you." Inside was a sealed envelope, a gold medal, and a letter in handwriting I recognized instantly, Grandpa's. "Evelyn, I declined my honor so that one day it could mean something greater. If you're reading this, it means you've earned it not by rank but by service. Deliver this medal where it belongs. The Queen will understand. HAC." My throat tightened. The medal shimmered in the soft light, a cross of gold and silver with both nations' insignias entwined. Sir Edmund watched me silently. "Your grandfather wanted you to complete what he began. There is one more file you need to see." He handed me a folder marked Operation Remembrance. Inside were photos of soldiers, both American and British, who had served under Grandpa's command in humanitarian missions across Europe. Some faces were familiar from old photo albums, others strangers. "These men and women formed the foundation of a veterans' relief effort," he explained. "Your grandfather funded it privately for decades. When he passed, it went dormant, but it can be reactivated with your authorization." I blinked, trying to absorb the weight of it. "You're saying he left me a mission?" "A legacy," Sir Edmund corrected gently. "A bridge between our nations, built not with politics but with service. The Queen wished to thank you personally for accepting that responsibility." He opened a side door, and for a heartbeat I forgot how to breathe. The room beyond was smaller than I expected. No cameras, no crowd, just a quiet space flooded with afternoon light. Standing beside a window overlooking the garden was a woman in a soft blue dress and pearls. Sir Edmund's voice softened. "Ma'am, this is Lieutenant Evelyn Carter." Her Majesty turned toward me, her smile gracious yet sharp with intelligence. "So you are Henry Carter's granddaughter," she said, her voice gentle but commanding. "He spoke of you often." I stood frozen, years of military training collapsing into instinct. I saluted before realizing how absurd it must look. She chuckled softly. "At ease, my dear. We are allies, after all." I lowered my hand, heart pounding. "Your Majesty, I didn't know." "Phew, did," she interrupted kindly. "Your grandfather's service was beyond medals. He believed that true honor is found in quiet acts, not grand ceremonies. I understand you have chosen to continue his work." I don't know yet," I admitted. She studied me for a moment that felt like a lifetime. "Then allow me to offer advice he once gave me. A soldier's legacy is not what she inherits, but what she carries forward." Her words hit with the precision of a command. When I left the palace, the drizzle had stopped. The driver waited by the car holding an umbrella. "Where to next, ma'am?" I looked down at the leather case in my hands. For the first time I realized it wasn't about inheritance, it was about trust. Grandpa had sent me here not to receive something, but to do something. "Take me to the archives," I said quietly. "I need to know what he built." As the car pulled away, I saw the Union Jack fluttering in the distance and thought of the American flag folded in my suitcase. 2 worlds, 1 mission. And somewhere I could almost hear Grandpa's gravelly laugh. "Good girl. You're not done serving yet." The archives weren't what I expected. I'd imagined dust and silence, something ancient and ceremonial. Instead, the royal archives beneath St. James's Palace were alive with quiet precision. Men and women in suits and white gloves moved through aisles of classified boxes marked with faded symbols, MOD size NATO, and a few coded abbreviations I didn't dare decipher. Sir Edmund accompanied me, his polished shoes barely making a sound on the marble floor. "Your grandfather's materials were sealed in 1984, he explained. He left explicit instructions that they were to be opened only by a member of his direct bloodline with active service credentials." "That would explain the timing," I murmured. "He died right before my next deployment." "Exactly," he said, stopping before a security terminal. After scanning my passport and military ID, he pressed his hand to the reader. The reinforced door hissed open. Inside waited a single metal case labeled Carter Henry A. Joint Service File. He gestured. "It's yours." I lifted the lid. Inside were handwritten journals, photographs, and a stack of official letters sealed with both American and British insignias. The scent of old ink and tobacco smoke rose from the pages, so distinctly him that I had to blink back tears. Sir Edmund stood back, giving me space. "Take your time, Lieutenant." The first page of the journal began simply, "If Evelyn ever finds this, tell her that some honors are meant to be earned twice, once in life, once in memory." My hands trembled slightly as I turned the pages. Each entry chronicled operations that never made the history books: evacuations in Berlin, intelligence drops in Eastern Europe, rebuilding missions in war-torn villages. He'd worked alongside British officers, not as a soldier of rank, but as a friend who believed in the same code: leave no one behind. Tucked in the back was a faded photograph. Grandpa stood beside a younger Queen Elizabeth, both in uniform, both smiling as if they'd just survived something monumental. Beneath the photo, written in his neat military block letters, "True allies never retire." I swallowed hard. He really was one of them, wasn't he? Sir Edmund nodded. "Your grandfather's courage saved lives during a delicate period, but he refused all decorations, insisting the mission remain anonymous. He believed service should speak louder than ceremony." I traced my fingers over the photo. "Then why me? Why send me here?" "Because you followed in his footsteps," Sir Edmund said quietly. "You joined the Navy. You kept your integrity intact in a family that didn't." I looked up sharply. He didn't flinch. "His words, not mine," he added. He wanted to pass on something more than medals. He wanted you to understand what duty truly meant. He motioned toward another folder, smaller and newer. This contains his final request. He asked that it be delivered directly to Her Majesty upon your arrival. I frowned. What's inside? He gave a diplomatic smile. That is above my clearance, Lieutenant. The rest of the day passed in a blur of reading, listening, absorbing. Each document deepened my understanding of who my grandfather really was, a man who used his influence not to seek power, but to protect it. When we left the archives, dusk had settled over London, and the city glowed like candlelight beneath the fog. Her Majesty requests your presence once more, Sir Edmund said as we reached the car. She wishes to speak privately. The palace gates opened again, but this time the air felt heavier, more reverent. The guards nodded as if they already knew who I was. A footman led me to a smaller room richly lit by gold sconces. The Queen stood by the fireplace, hands folded, her gaze thoughtful. Lieutenant Carter, she said, you've seen the records. Yes, ma'am, I said, standing at attention before catching myself. Your Majesty. Formality suits you, she said with a faint smile. But please relax. You've inherited enough discipline for 2 generations. I smiled, but it faltered quickly. Your Majesty, I don't understand why my grandfather involved you in all this. He could have just left me a letter. She walked closer, her expression softening. He knew a letter wouldn't be enough. He wanted you to feel the weight of service, to know that your family's legacy isn't about wealth but stewardship. Stewardship. The Queen nodded. Your grandfather helped establish a joint fund decades ago, what we now call the Remembrance Foundation. It was created to support injured veterans and their families across both our nations. When he retired, the fund's American branch fell dormant. He hoped you would revive it. I blinked. Me? Who better, she said simply. You understand both duty and compassion. The general was clear his estate was never meant for indulgence. It was meant for impact. She stepped aside and gestured to a velvet box on the mantel. Inside you'll find his commendation, the one he declined. I opened it carefully. The metal shimmered gold and crimson, engraved with the words, "For service beyond borders." I felt a lump rise in my throat. Your grandfather's final wish, she continued, was that you accept it in his stead on behalf of every soldier who served quietly without recognition. I could barely speak. I don't deserve this. The Queen smiled faintly. Neither did he, according to himself. That was precisely why he did. For a long moment the room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Finally she extended her hand. Lieutenant Carter, may I? I nodded. She pinned the medal to my uniform herself. The gesture felt impossibly personal, almost sacred. When she stepped back, she said softly, He once told me, my granddaughter will know what to do when the time comes. I believe he was right. I swallowed hard. What am I supposed to do, Your Majesty? Go home, she said. Serve again, but this time in your own way. The words echoed through me as if spoken by both of them, her and Grandpa together. When I left the palace that night, London glowed beneath the rain. I held the medal in my palm, its weight both unbearable and comforting. Somewhere across the ocean, my family was probably still celebrating their inheritance, unaware that the one they mocked now carried a legacy signed by the Queen herself. For the first time I realized Grandpa hadn't left me nothing. He'd left me everything that mattered. When I returned to my hotel that night, I couldn't sleep. The rain tapped gently on the window like the ticking of a clock, urging me to act. Grandpa's medal lay on the desk beside the sealed folder from the Queen. The weight of it all pressed against my chest, honor, confusion, and something that felt suspiciously like destiny. I finally opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, the royal crest embossed in gold. It read, The Remembrance Foundation, established jointly under the governments of the United States and the United Kingdom, funded by General Henry A. Carter. In the event of his passing, his designated successor is authorized to resume operations under dual approval. At the bottom, there was a signature line, Evelyn Carter, Lieutenant, United States Navy. For a moment, I just stared. My grandfather hadn't left me a gift, he'd left me a responsibility. The next morning I met again with Sir Edmund and a younger aide named Clara. She brought me tea strong enough to stand a spoon in, and a stack of records older than my parents' marriage. Your grandfather funded these operations quietly for decades, Clara said. Housing for wounded veterans, scholarships for their children, reintegration programs. It all stopped after an incident in the early 2000s. What kind of incident? She hesitated. Financial mismanagement. The American trustees, your father among them, froze the foundation's assets after a dispute. The British half remained intact, but the U.S. side fell silent. My pulse quickened. My father, Sir Edmund, nodded solemnly. He was granted limited administrative rights through your grandfather's estate. Unfortunately, he used them to divert funds into personal ventures just shy of illegality. The Queen chose not to intervene out of respect for your grandfather's privacy, but she believed the day would come when you'd correct it. The words struck like a cold wave. So that was the real reason for the ticket to London. Grandpa knew his son couldn't be trusted. He'd sent me to finish what he couldn't without igniting scandal. I asked to see the ledgers. The numbers didn't lie. Years of donations had been redirected into shell companies, luxury developments, private investments, all under Carter Holdings. I felt sick. Clara's voice softened. We can help you reinstate the foundation. All it needs is your signature as successor. Once reactivated, the U.S. branch will regain control of the assets. But, Sir Edmund leaned forward. You'll be declaring open war on your family, legally, ethically, socially. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Grandpa's flag folded on my nightstand, about the laughter in that Virginia parlor, about Dad's smug grin when he said, "Guess he didn't love you much." Yes, I said quietly, I'm prepared. That afternoon we went to the Royal Treasury Office to finalize the transfer. I signed the documents, each stroke of the pen steady as a heartbeat. When it was done, Sir Edmund handed me a stamped copy of the charter. Congratulations, Lieutenant, he said. The Remembrance Foundation now belongs to you. Belongs. The word felt strange. It wasn't mine, not really, it was everyone's. But it carried his name, and that meant everything. Before I left, Clara slipped a second envelope into my hand. This came from the late General's personal safe, she whispered. He wanted you to have it once you signed. In the cab back to the hotel, I opened it. Inside was a single photograph, Grandpa standing with a group of veterans, their hands resting on each other's shoulders. On the back, he'd written, "Service never ends, Evie. It only changes uniforms." Tears blurred the ink. That night, I emailed my commanding officer back in Norfolk to request temporary reassignment to the States for family estate matters. I didn't elaborate. He replied within hours, "Take the time you need, Lieutenant. You've earned it." When I boarded the return flight the next morning, I carried only 3 things: the medal, the charter, and Grandpa's note. Everything else, resentment hurt. Confusion stayed behind in the London fog. As the plane lifted over the Atlantic, I replayed the Queen's words in my mind. Serve again in your own way. Maybe this was what Grandpa meant all along. Service wasn't about obeying orders, it was about answering the quiet calls no one else could hear. When the wheels touched down in Washington, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't the forgotten granddaughter anymore. I was the General's last soldier. And my mission had just begun. By the time I landed back in Virginia, autumn had turned the air sharp and gold. The Carter estate loomed over the hills like a fortress of pride and polished glass, every stone bought with someone else's sacrifice. I hadn't been home since the funeral. Dad was waiting in the driveway, coffee in hand, sunglasses reflecting the last light of day. "Well, look who decided to return from her royal vacation," he said, smirking. "Did the Queen offer you tea and sympathy?" I smiled faintly, something like that. Mom emerged behind him, perfectly pressed as always. "You should have told us you were leaving Evelyn. The neighbors asked where you'd gone. It was embarrassing." "I didn't think it mattered," I said quietly, stepping past them toward the door. Inside, the house smelled like polished oak and money. The same family portraits hung on the walls, Grandpa's military photo right in the center, surrounded by my father's golf trophies and my brother's college awards. His uniform looked out of place among all that ego. At dinner, they talked about their inheritance like it was a game. Dad described the renovations to the estate, the new vineyard, the imported marble for the foyer. Mom nodded proudly, swirling her wine. When she finally turned to me, her tone was half amusement, half condescension. So, what did you do in London, sightseeing, shopping? I set down my fork. I went to Buckingham Palace. The table fell silent for a beat, then Dad burst out laughing. Right. And I had lunch with the president last week. I met with Her Majesty's secretary, I continued evenly. She asked me to take over something my grandfather started. Mom tilted her head. A hobby. A foundation. Dad raised an eyebrow. Oh, for what tea parties and old uniforms? For wounded veterans, I said. Grandpa founded it with the Queen decades ago. He left it to me. Dad's smirk faltered. That's ridiculous. He never mentioned it. Maybe not to you, I replied. For the first time that night, I saw something flicker in his eyes, not anger, but fear. He looked down at his glass. Well, whatever fantasy you've built for yourself, I hope it keeps you busy. Some of us have real responsibilities. The rest of dinner was silence and silverware. Later, as I stood on the back porch watching the moon rise over the fields, I heard footsteps behind me. Mom joined me, her arms crossed. You don't have to pretend you're important, Evelyn. It's sweet, but you'll only embarrass yourself. I turned to her. You know what's really embarrassing, having a daughter who served her country and still being ashamed of her. Her lips tightened. You always were dramatic. No, I said, stepping closer. I'm just done apologizing for being something you'll never understand. She didn't answer. Back in my old bedroom, the walls were still lined with framed medals and commendations Grandpa had given me over the years. I pulled out my laptop and opened the encrypted files Sir Edmund had sent. Everything was there, the ledgers, the trust deeds, the proof of how Dad had rerouted funds into personal accounts. My hands shook, not with rage but with clarity. It wasn't revenge I wanted, it was correction. The next morning I drove into Richmond and met with the Carter family's longtime attorney, Mr. Halloway, the same man who had handed me that envelope at the funeral. His eyes widened when he saw the royal seal on my briefcase. Lieutenant Carter, he said, standing, I must admit I didn't expect to see you again. I need you to process some paperwork, I said, sliding the documents across his desk. He put on his glasses and read in silence. You're reinstating the Remembrance Foundation. Yes, and I'm transferring all assets associated with it back under federal and royal oversight. He blinked. That means your father will lose control of several joint accounts. I know. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your grandfather would be proud. When I left the office, the morning sun was breaking through the clouds. For the first time, I felt weightless. That evening, the phone rang. Dad's voice thundered through the receiver. What did you do? Evelyn Halloway said you filed something with the Treasury. I kept my tone calm. I just fulfilled Grandpa's last wish. The foundation is active again. You had no right. I had every right, I said, legally and morally. There was a long pause. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. You don't understand how this looks. I think I do. It looks like accountability. I hung up before he could answer. Outside, the night air smelled like rain again. I stepped onto the porch and looked up at the stars. Somewhere, Grandpa was probably chuckling, not in triumph, but in relief. I wasn't angry anymore, I was just free. And as the cicadas hummed and the wind rustled through the trees, I whispered the words he'd once told me as a child. Stand your ground, Evie. Someday they'll salute you. I didn't need their approval anymore. The salute was already mine. 3 days later, I was halfway through morning coffee when my phone began vibrating non-stop. Texts, news alerts, and missed calls lit up the screen like fireworks. At first, I thought something had gone wrong with the foundation paperwork. Then I saw the headline. Queen endorses U.S.-UK Veterans Trust General Carter's granddaughter to lead joint reactivation. There, it was my name right under Grandpa's. Lieutenant Evelyn Carter, United States Navy Reserve, appointed director of the Remembrance Foundation. The article included a photo I hadn't known existed, me standing beside Sir Edmund outside Buckingham Palace, the medal pinned to my uniform. The caption read, "Honoring a legacy of service across generations." By the time I finished reading, the phone was already ringing again. Dad. I took a slow breath before answering. Morning, Dad. Morning. Do you have any idea what's happening? There's a picture of you with the Queen in the paper. What the hell did you do? Exactly what Grandpa asked me to, I said calmly. I reinstated his foundation. You went behind my back. Do you realize what this means for our family finances? The accounts, the properties? They were never ours, I interrupted. They belonged to the veterans. His voice hardened. You think you're some kind of hero now? No, I said softly. I think I finally stopped pretending I wasn't one. He hung up. By noon, reporters had started calling the estate. My brother texted, "You really went royal, huh?" My mother simply wrote, "We need to talk." When I arrived that evening, the front gate was already open, an unspoken symbol that the family walls had cracked. Dad was pacing the foyer, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, eyes red. "Evelyn," he said, voice tight, "you've humiliated us." I met his gaze evenly. "No, Dad, I revealed us." His jaw clenched. "You think you're better than your own family now?" I think I learned from the only member who understood honor. Mom stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Your father worked hard for everything he has." With Grandpa's money, I cut in. Money that was supposed to rebuild homes for veterans. Money you turned into vineyards and vacation houses. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dad exploded. "You're ungrateful. You'd be nothing without this family name." "Funny," I said, pulling the folded document from my coat. "That's exactly what I came to talk about." I placed the charter of the Remembrance Foundation on the table. As of yesterday, the trust is under federal and royal protection. Every dollar that was misused is being returned to its rightful purpose. You'll receive a formal audit notice within a week. His face drained of color. "You wouldn't." "I already did." Mom's voice trembled. "Evelyn, this is going to ruin us." "No," I said gently. "It's going to save us, just not in the way you think." Dad turned away, gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles went white. "You've disgraced your grandfather's memory." I stepped closer. "No, Dad," I honored it. "You're just upset that for once you're not the one wearing the uniform." The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. When I left, the house behind me felt smaller somehow, the mansion, the paintings, the trophies. They all looked like stage props now. That night, I sat in my car on the hill overlooking the estate. The porch lights flickered tiny and fragile while my phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Sir Edmund. "Lieutenant Carter," he said warmly. "I trust you've seen the news coverage." "I have." Her Majesty was pleased. She asked me to convey her personal congratulations and to inform you that your speech at the Foundation's inauguration has been scheduled for next week. What? There will be representatives from both governments, several generals, and a few veterans' families. It's a significant occasion. I laughed nervously. "I'm not a politician, Sir Edmund." "No," he said, "and that's precisely why you're the right person. Your grandfather wanted someone who could speak from the heart, not the podium." The next week passed in a blur of preparations. I rehearsed in front of the mirror, then stopped. Grandpa would have hated that. He always said, "Speak plain, Evie. Truth doesn't need polish." The day of the ceremony, the auditorium in D.C. was packed, rows of uniforms, ribbons, and medals shining under the lights. A portrait of General Henry A. Carter stood beside the stage, draped with both flags. When they called my name, I walked to the podium, the sound of my heels echoing like drum beats. "Good morning," I began, voice steady. "When I was a little girl, my grandfather told me that a soldier never truly retires, she just changes her battlefield. I didn't understand what he meant until now. I spoke about honor, about service, about what it meant to carry a legacy that wasn't built on wealth but on faith in humanity. I talked about the veterans who came home and were forgotten, and how this foundation would make sure they never were again. When I finished, the room was silent, then came the applause, soft at first, then thunderous. Somewhere in that sea of uniforms, I saw an older Marine wipe his eyes. Afterward, as I stood backstage, Sir Edmund approached. "Your grandfather would have been proud," he said. "I hope so." He smiled. He would have said, "Mission accomplished, Lieutenant." That night, as I drove home, my phone lit up with a new message from an unknown number. It was Dad. "Your speech was something. I didn't understand before, I do now. I'm sorry." I stared at the words until they blurred. For the first time, the silence between us felt less like a wall and more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. I didn't reply, not yet. Some truths didn't need words, they just needed time. Outside, the night sky stretched wide and full of stars, the same kind Grandpa used to chart missions by. I rolled down the window, breathed in the cold air, and whispered, "Roger that, sir." 6 months later, spring rolled over Virginia like a quiet redemption. The vineyard behind the Carter estate bloomed again, but this time without the hollow pride that once choked it. The headlines had faded, the audits were done, and the Remembrance Foundation was thriving, homes built, scholarships granted, and forgotten soldiers honored. But I hadn't been back since the night of our confrontation. Not until today. The car engine purred softly as I parked beneath the old oak tree Grandpa planted the year I was born. The wind smelled faintly of lilac and rain. I stepped out in my navy dress uniform, the metal gleaming faintly in the overcast light. It wasn't about show, it was about respect. The front door opened before I could knock. Mom stood there, smaller somehow, her voice uncertain. "You look beautiful, Evelyn." "Thank you, Mom." She hesitated. "Your father's in the garden." I nodded and walked past her down the familiar stone path that led to Grandpa's memorial. He'd been buried under the flag he once saluted beneath a marble plaque that read, "Jen." Henry A. Carter served both duty and humanity. Dad was kneeling by the grave, trimming the grass around it with quiet precision. His once impeccable hair was now streaked with silver. When he looked up, there was no arrogance, only weariness. "I didn't think you'd come," he said softly. "I wasn't sure I would," I admitted. He set down the shears, exhaled slowly. "I needed time to face what I'd done to him, to you, to what our name stood for." I watched him straighten the small US and UK flags on either side of the stone. "He'd like this," I said, "two nations side by side." He smiled faintly. He always believed strength came from alliances. "I never understood that until I watched your speech." We stood in silence for a while. Birds sang somewhere in the distance, the world alive again. Finally, he turned toward me. "You know I was angry at first. Thought you'd betrayed us. But then I realized you were the only one who remembered who we were supposed to be." I swallowed the knot in my throat. I didn't want to destroy anything, Dad. I just couldn't let his work die in greed. He nodded slowly. "You didn't destroy it. You redeemed it." The air between us softened, fragile but honest. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small weathered box. "Your grandfather gave this to me after my first promotion. I never opened it. I wasn't ready." He handed it to me. Inside was a single silver chess piece, the queen. "One day, give this to the person who understands the game better than you ever did," Dad recited quietly. "He must have known it'd be you." I laughed, half choking on tears. He always did love his symbolism. We stood there for a long while, not as adversaries, but as two soldiers on the same side for once. When Mom joined us, she was holding a bouquet of white roses. "I'm sorry," she said before I could speak. "For what I said at the will reading. For what I thought of you." I took her hand gently. "It's okay, Mom. We all saw what we wanted to see back then." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You saw what mattered." She placed the flowers beside the grave, and together we bowed our heads. Later, as we walked back toward the house, Dad stopped by the porch steps. "We want to help," he said. "The foundation, however we can. Not for credit, just to do something right for once." I smiled, feeling the old ache loosen. "Then start with the Veterans Housing Project in Norfolk. They could use a good construction team." His eyebrows rose. "You'd trust me with that." "I'm not giving you the project," I said with a grin. "I'm offering you a chance to serve." He nodded, understanding perfectly. That evening I drove to the coast where Grandpa used to take me fishing. The water shimmered gold under the sunset, quiet and vast. I stood there alone, watching the waves roll in rhythmic, patient, eternal. From my pocket I pulled the chess piece and turned it in my fingers. "You were right, Grandpa," I whispered. "Some battles aren't fought in war rooms. They're fought in living rooms, across dinner tables, inside the hearts of people who forgot what honor means." The wind carried the words away like a salute. When I returned to the city that night, the Foundation's new headquarters glowed softly in the dark, a modest building but alive with purpose. On the wall inside hung two flags, side by side, and a single quote engraved in brass. "Service isn't what we do for medals. It's what we do when no one is watching." Jenner Henry A. Carter. I looked around at the young volunteers sorting supplies and answering calls from veterans. This was what legacy looked like, not wealth, not prestige, but continuity. Before leaving, I wrote a short note and placed it on my desk for the next morning's staff briefing. Let's remember that every decision we make here honors someone who once wore a uniform. Make Grandpa proud, make America proud. Lieutenant Evelyn Carter. Outside, the first stars blinked awake. I took a deep breath and smiled. Mission accomplished, I whispered, but the work goes on. Then, turning toward the camera of a world that would never truly see the whole story, I spoke the same way Grandpa used to when signing off a field report firm, clear and full of quiet pride. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on your own legacy. Remember the people who served before you, forgive those who failed you, and honor the ones who believed in you when no one else did. Because family isn't about blood or inheritance, it's about who still stands beside you when the uniforms are gone.